Doing well. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. The whole prolific thing, I think I owe you a glass of wine for that one. That was very nice of you to say. So my name's Ross. I'm the Managing Director of Type A Media. We're an agency over in London. Some of you may have seen me on SEMrush, and for those who haven't seen me at all, that hurts my fragile ego. I run a show called The Canonical Chronicle. It's the meme-infused SEO news where I'm kind of silly and give news updates like you've just seen. But day to day, most of the things we do is create interesting data visuals for clients and pitch them into journalists to get them a bunch of links. So on a campaign average, we will get around 50 links in a campaign, and the average DR, if you're using Ahrefs metrics, is usually about 60. So we get these kind of high-end media links, and this is kind of how we kind of go about doing it. So I'm not actually going to go through like how we pitch people. I'm going to go through how we make the thing that gets the links. But we helped Pitchbox launch their blog about a year ago now. With this kind of scalable link building strategy thing. So if you want to go over to their blog and read that, that gives you the full rundown of exactly what we do in order to pitch journalists to get positive responses. All right, so like I say, this is going to be about making the thing that gets the link. Because a lot of times that's quite challenging, right? Because if you've got a client that doesn't have any data, they don't have anything interesting or newsworthy, you kind of need to manufacture the news a little bit for them. And so this is how we typically do it. So before we get into it, I want to tell you a quick story. I want to take you all the way back to 2012. Now, I was a young, fresh-faced account manager. I can't mention the name of the agency I was in, but let's just say it's one of the big network agencies that are kind of global, one of the three. And we just won this airline as a client, which was amazing. The brief was they wanted to move from one domain to another. And because they were doing a migration, they also wanted to bolster it with a bunch of brand new links. So like the new domain got indexed really quickly and all the products they had got indexed really quickly. And we preserved as much link value as possible. Here's the kicker. I think I was like 21 at the time. And they're like, oh yeah, it's we're going to give you £50,000 a month for this retainer. And I was like, oh my God, I don't think I've ever seen £50,000 in my life, never mind as a monthly retainer. So I done what every self-respecting young account manager done. We, of course, had a very sensible strategy session where we worked out how we could actually spend this client's money on the links. And typically what happens with these sort of strategy sessions is we're kind of coming up with ideas for the content. So for some stupid reason, we decided to get creative involved. Now, I don't know if any of you guys work at agencies, but this cliche of what someone from creative looks like is actually, you've probably seen this guy in your own agency or your own company, because all creative directors kind of have that kind of look. And creative done something called an ideation session. Now, as far as I could tell, an ideation session was literally sitting on beanbags and looking out of a window, just writing stuff and putting post-its on the wall. And I didn't, as a young SEO, really understand what was going on. The weird thing for me was like, there was this kind of chief creative that called himself the creative director, where all these ideas were just generated by everyone's opinion in the room. Like there was no data behind it. There was no methodology behind it. It was literally guys with big egos just coming up with, oh, I think this would be good. Oh, I think this would be good. Like absolutely no data backing whatsoever. And like, to be fair to them, like some of the ideas were actually, you know, really good. They had an idea to like go and take like pictures of famous monuments around the world and create an app where you could actually vote on how good the place was to visit as a tourist with completely alternative metrics, like all sorts of stuff. There's an Apple Watch concept that when you wore the Apple Watch and looked at like the Arc de Triomphe for Big Ben, it would actually measure your heart rate to see how excited you were in that particular place. Like there was some really cool stuff. Obviously, there was some old guy in the room who was obviously like, we should do something with QR codes. Like that's just part of the process with technology companies. So we just kind of all kind of nodded and moved on. So long story short, we went through a couple of days of this kind of creative ideation process. And we finally settled on the concept, the £50,000 a month concept to sell to the client and get signed off. And it was an infographic. So it was all of that time, all of that effort, all of that creative genius, infographic. Unbelievable. To be fair, we had to it had a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of interactive pieces on it. So it was a pretty good infographic. It bloody had to be for 50 grand. So we obviously pitched it to the client. They use their subjective opinion. So you'll notice that's 2 times people have used their opinion and not any data-based facts, or it's just people with ideas. And they were like, yep, I think that one. And they just picked one out of the crowd. And I would love to say that when we started this campaign, amazing things happened. I know everyone's on mute, so I'll just let you kind of guess in your head how many links we generated. We actually only generated 2 links, one of which is from a blog that I owned. And you got to think, all right, so they just gave you 50 grand and you go back to them. I don't know if you've ever given a client a report before that says your £50,000 has got you nothing. It's an awkward one. And the reason was because it wasn't objective. It was all just coming from these kind of subjective ideas. Absolutely no frameworks or methodologies to go through. It was literally just looking out the window, and as creativity magically struck, they would kind of write down these ideas. And the huge problem with that is you see it through the lens of the people in the room. So if you've got a room full of young white dudes in their 20s, you're going to get not very diverse and interesting ideas. Nothing wrong with white dudes in their 20s. I was one of them, and I used to think very highly of myself at that age. But the problem is, there's not a lot of creative friction or good ideas happening if it's just the same type of human in a room with no framework to go through. It doesn't really speak to the audience. So naturally, it failed miserably. We also had no concept of flop risk. So when we're doing any sort of outreach, we typically plot algorithmic risk and flop risk on this kind of axis, where flop risk is, we build our marketing campaigns. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So when they flop, that's bad. So we need to reduce that as much as possible. So a campaign that's got a high flop risk would be like pitching the BBC or the Sydney Times or something like that to get a piece in the newspaper. Low algorithmic risk. I've never had something with the BBC get me a penalty, and I don't think it ever will. However, if I was doing consistent guest posting and creating a footprint for myself, I'm guaranteed the link almost, because I'm giving them content and I'm expecting to get the link in return, but it's creating more algorithmic risk. So we play at the far end of this graph, high flop risk, 0 algorithmic risk. So with that in mind, we need to come up with frameworks and ways of working to reduce the flop risk and make sure that we're successful regardless of what happens when we actually pitch it. So this is the methodology. So we are an agency, so we reserve the right to have wanky acronyms for everything we do. And our outreach acronym is something called DISCO. And this is the process. And the reason why I'm showing you this is it's very important to see that sign off is bang in the middle before the client actually sees anything. If you're holding these ideation sessions and coming up with ideas, make sure the client is not in the room. They should have absolutely no say in what goes into this. They've got way too much power, and it's very hard for you. I mean, your creatives are, like gentle little, scared little rabbits. They need to be coaxed out and their egos massaged so they can come up with good ideas. If you've got the guy paying the bills in the room, it's a bad thing. So make sure that you come up with the ideas before you actually get the client involved. What I'd also recommend is before the client sees anything, you should be taking, let's say you come up with 5 ideas, cold pitch them to 10 journalists each. And if they come back and they say, oh yeah, I like this, or can I get some more information, or it's a rubbish idea, or if they just ignore you, that gives you an idea of what the PR certainty is going to be. So when I go to present this to the client, it's no longer, hello, Mr. Client, can you please pick, of one of these 5 ideas, your favorite based on your subjective opinion. It's our data says that journalists like this the most, what fits the brand best and what fits your marketing campaigns best for right now. You'll also see on the vertical axis, we've got data availability. When we're doing all this stuff, we have a data scientist working behind the scenes to see if there is enough data to actually support the story we want to go out with and how hard it's going to be to get it. So for example, high data availability. We've done a piece of PR with eBay recently where they gave us a bunch of their fitness equipment data, and which has obviously went up because of coronavirus. So that's 100% data availability for them because they are physically giving us first party data. However, if I was to have to scrape multiple websites to get data points and then merge them, the confidence in that data goes down and down and down because it's harder to wrangle it and get a cohesive data set. So we can kind of present that to them. So yes, it might be an absolute winner when it comes to PR, but it's going to be totally brutal to get this put together. So it might take 2 months to make the asset. By that point, our time's run out for PR, so we might need to move on. And we'll typically give them something like this, which is just a really basic table of the ideas so they can work out for themselves what works and what doesn't. After that, I don't know if you've ever written down the headlines you're going to go out with before you go out with them. I'm shocked to find that most people, when doing outreach and pitching, they will just, at the moment of needing to reach out to the journalist, will start writing what they think they want to hear, which is way, way too late in the process. So what I'd highly recommend is you put something together like this. If you're working with the enterprise, it helps the client sign it off quicker. Usually what happens with SEOs doing outreach, there's some sort of PR people who want to like control everything and the people you're talking to. This knocks that out pretty quickly. So get your research, your angles, your headlines and your pitches into a document like this, because sometimes when you write down your headline and you read it back to yourself, it's actually rubbish. And if you've got dedicated time to come up with better headlines, it's going to be a better campaign. Whereas if you're in your email client writing the headlines, you're like, oh gosh, I really need to send this. Oh, this isn't working. It's not very good. Like, it's at that point too late and you're being too reactive. All right, so the great thing about this kind of general process is because it's data-led, we're going to be cutting it in multiple ways. So we're going to get 3 angles and 3 headlines. So that's 9 completely different pitches. So from the data set we're going to take, we want a national angle, a local angle, and a trade angle. And inside of all of those, there's completely different headlines. So there's 9 potential avenues we can go down with all of this outreach. So even if the journalist who we pitched the national campaign to doesn't like it, we've got 8 different groups of journalists with completely different angles. So our flop risk is coming down and down and down. Mathematically, that means you need to win only 11% of the time. Now, the reason why creative does so well when you've got paid media behind it is because, let's say, have you ever seen an advert on the television where you just think it's rubbish? Now that's had to go through creative direction, art director, the whole deal, and then someone spent millions of dollars getting it onto the television, but it's a rubbish ad. The thing is, it doesn't matter because the risk is removed by the physical amount of people seeing it. So if you show an ad to 1 million people and 90% of them think it is absolutely rubbish, doesn't matter. 100,000 people think it's amazing. So you've de-risked it. You've reduced your flop risk by showing it to loads of people. So the way that we de-risk and then reduce our flop risk is by doing the exact same thing and just by showing it to lots of people. In this case, it's journalists, not media impressions. All right, so getting into actually making the thing. So we start with the audience. So it's very important to work out who you're actually talking to. So if you're just coming up with ideas based on what you've experienced in your life, that doesn't really work. And obviously the place to go when it comes to audience analysis is straight into Facebook audience insights. Now, I'm not looking to see, oh, this is for women who are between 25 and 34 who live in Brisbane and own a lawnmower. Like, I don't really care about any of that. What I care about is like weird outlier facts about the person, because I'm then gonna jump onto those outlier facts and make an interesting story about it. So I don't care about the core demographic or all the usual stuff. I want to see something weird about the audience that I can start playing with and make a cool story about. here's a great example. So because SEO is huge when it comes to the casino industry, we get a lot of casinos contacting us to do outreach to get these kind of high-end links for them. So when we put into Facebook Audience Insights the keyword casino games to see the audience that actually consume them, they're 93% more likely to be engaged, 58% less likely to be married. So that tells me that they're all young guys. And if you're a lady at the moment and you're engaged and your man is consuming a lot of casino games, it's highly likely you're not going to make it to the marriage stage. I'm sorry to say. But the fact that this little gem came out of this casino thing, I'm like, all right, we're going to do a piece on, the size of wedding rings and all of that sort of stuff, and we're going to pitch it to this predominantly male casino game playing audience. The client thought we were absolutely mental, but it ended up in 40, 50 links because it spoke to the audience. It wasn't necessarily about casino games because it's impossible to get good news out of that, but we can be kind of smart and interesting with it when we actually see what's happening inside the data. Here's another one, investment bankers. Apparently they love money. Of course they do, they're investment bankers. But they also love Nando's, which is a Portuguese chicken restaurant in the UK. I don't know if you got it in Singapore and Australia. They also like to smell and dress like a teenager. So one of the things that they really love, investment bankers, apparently, is Lynx, which I think you might call Axe, which is essentially a really bad deodorant that teenage boys wear in the UK. And they're really into their kind of glammy, kind of sportswear sort of stuff. So I'm building a picture of what this person is like. They also are into things that are classed as kind of like pretend edgy or pretend cool. So diversity is like an urban dance group, but it's like a very mainstream urban dance group. So they're kind of like, they want to be perceived as edgy, but they're actually just, mainstream folks. And they like pages like this. Which James Bond character are you? So you're building a picture of this absolute douchebag that we call the investment banker. They think they're a bit of a big deal, and all of these things coming together, I'm building a picture of them so that I can then make content that's going to resonate with this person, something that nobody in the room could have done unless they had this information. So very quickly, we'll write assumptive statements on a whiteboard. So we'll say, this person is they're safe, edgy. So they like pretend, kind of urban and out there things. And then we start making statements about them. So when we're coming up with ideas, we've got something to test the assumption on. So we'll literally just be like, every single thing that comes up, let's say they're like a blue collar worker who's a value shopper. If we come up with an idea, we need to test that against the assumption of who the person is. And if it fails the assumption, we don't use the idea. So we're testing it against the person who's consuming the content, not our random subjective opinions. And here's the framework when it comes to actually coming up with it. So we were very lucky to work with a company called Unilad. Unilad last year were the biggest social media page in the world, the most engaged. I can't tell you what their traffic was, but it was getting close to the billions. When I worked with this other company back in the day, we had Condé Nast as a client, and I can confirm that they had more traffic than every Condé Nast title combined. And that was from cat videos and stuff like that. So when we dig into their analytics, we can see this framework start to appear just the same way that a pop song has a formula, so does content that does well and gets links. It's really simple. And this is the formula. An identity piece. So we see this quite a lot. This is something that expresses your identity better than you can. So an example would be, it's hard out there for a lefty, because being left-handed is an identity factor that you actually identify with being. So if we create content around that, you're naturally going to start sharing it more. And of course, it works really well. These are just like really easy these are clients with no actual day-to-day information we can use and package up as news. So we just do original research and publish it like this. Why you shouldn't ever mess with gingers. I hope there's no gingers in the chat. Having red hair is an identity factor because you identify as that, and it's quite a big cultural thing. And again, easy peasy. We just start pitching that with the identity factor, and what do you know? it gets links. It just keeps going and going. Next one is utility. So this is much more common in kind of SEO building things for links, where we're looking at, you know, calculators and maps, something that's physically useful to the end user. Think of a mortgage calculator as a utility piece of content. So to make it interesting, you just change the way that the content looks in surprise and delight. So what 2000 calorie looks like in fast food. So that is just a data table, but we're taking it and presenting it in a completely different way that's useful and interesting. And it's much easier to get it live in the press. So really basic one, we had a skincare client that had no news whatsoever. And then you can literally be like, okay, well, we know it's summer coming up and all the rest of it. Let's get a dermatologist to rank booze from bad to worst. Spoiler alert, all booze is bad for your skin. So sorry to break the bad news to you. This last one's really hard to do. So social information. So it takes an idea that you've already believe in and it breaks it or it confirms it. So an example of that would be Londoners found to be the most miserable people in the UK. So when we're pitching people in the north of England who typically do not like people from the big city, that does really well in Northern English newspapers like this. So the concept is we're taking something you already believe in and telling you actually that's true or that's completely false. So saying that Londoners are the most unhappy people in the UK, you're like, well, why are they unhappy? They've got the most expensive homes and the highest salaries, but they're actually miserable. So that breaks what we already believe in. Here's another one. It doesn't have to be big data sets. It could literally be something as basic as Google Trends. Now, if you look at this and zoom it out, technically that headline is allergies on the rise globally, because every year there's a higher uptick and a higher uptick and a higher uptick. Now, if you actually dig into the data, it's all mobile phones and people under 21 that are searching for this more. So if I was wanting to create something that was a social information piece and pitch it to right-wing media in the UK, who look at millennials and young people with this kind of snowflake mentality, I can take that very simple piece of data, run it through our framework and say, I know that the Daily Mail like social information pieces that confirms that millennials are snowflakes by giving them that data. So that's the kind of how we're starting to use social information. The reason why this methodology works is because it works in reverse of how you usually get content discovered. So the content finds the audience don't find the content. And what I mean by that is, because you are a lefty, because you have got ginger hair, because you also think that millennials are snowflakes, that automatically gets put into your filter bubble of news. And so that automatically finds you. And here's an example of some of the things that typically we would put underneath each of these things. The more social information stuff is not as brand safe as the rest. So just be very careful and make sure that you're getting brand managers to sign this stuff off before it goes live. And lastly, when we're coming up with this stuff to reduce flop risk, like we need to start from like a really big concept and drill it all the way down to something really small so I can get multiple bites of the cherry. So not only do I have 9 pitches to like 3 completely different industries, from national to local to trade, inside of each of those verticals, I've got big publications all the way down to small. So if we use gaming as an example, we ran a piece for a client where we looked at the historic value of computer games. So like there's a piece of news that said like Mario Kart is worth 30 grand or something crazy. So we took like a average amount of computer games that people were sitting on and selling on eBay and worked out how much money they were quote unquote sitting on as an asset with their old computer games. So we go broad with gamers, then we go slightly more niche. So we're now talking to like computer game magazines, original Super Nintendo. And then we're going into community stuff. So these are like blogs. These are like really small magazines. These are single person operated websites. And then the last one is just Fanatic, which is, there's a much smaller amount of them, but you need to be less personal when you're actually doing the pitching. So all I'm trying to do is broaden the scope of the outreach as much as humanly possible with all of this. All right, 3 data sources that we use to tell these stories. The best one by far is private data from their analytics or their CRM. If they've got a BI team that can provide you with actual industry information, that is absolute gold dust. So that with a little quote in there will get you links every single day. it doesn't have to be like really interesting either. So for a client of ours, we ended up just taking their GA data and looked at where the most apprenticeships were up and down the country, and that was enough to get them published. We like government data sets as well. In fact, this is probably the one that we use the most. So if you go onto every single country's government websites, for us, we've got the Office of National Statistics. In the States, they've got like Center for Disease Control, FDA, like the whole thing. They've got these massive public data sets that are free to download. Now, you need to be a data scientist to actually use them because there are millions of lines and you physically can't open it in a CSV on a computer because it's just too much for a graphical interface to load up. But it's all there and it's all free. And because it's a government source, it's already pre-validated. So when I pitch that to an editor, they're like, where'd you get it? I'm like, it's the government data from 2019. Like, so we're in. The last one is potential data. So it doesn't exist yet and you're going to go create it. I personally hate this. It's really hard to pitch a survey to a national newspaper and for them to care because it's usually not a big enough sample size, and we're an SEO company. We're not a professional market analysis company. So we present the questions in a biased way to get the answers we want for our piece. So it's less interesting to people actually publishing the news, but it is definitely an option if you're struggling. So with the private stuff, this is what I was talking about earlier. So we went onto this client's analytics, and it turns out there's a little place called East Kilbride, which is actually very close to where I'm from, up in Scotland. It's an old mining town. It was really damaged by all the industry leaving, and it's a kind of down and out place. But that's the place that's got the most jobs for apprentices, according to the analytics. So if we think back to the framework of utility, social information, and identity, identity is I'm from that place. I identify as from being from there. Ticking the box number one. Ticking the box number two, it breaks social information. So the actual story, it's like, wait, what? This like little horrible town in the middle of nowhere is actually the best place for young people to get jobs. Breaks my preconceived notions, and that's why it does so well. Mashing up your data with other sources. We absolutely love this. Sometimes a client will give us something that's kind of okay, but not enough to be newsworthy. So we're doing something with a company who had an esports team. So people, you know, playing FIFA for a living and getting paid for it. And we were looking at their data and we quickly realized that the kids playing FIFA, kids actually derogatory, the people playing FIFA as a living were getting paid on average 75% more than professional football players in the Premier League. That's totally insane. At the same time, the government had just released gender equality pay information in the UK. So we then looked at all female football teams and we found out that 100% of people playing FIFA games get paid more than female football players. We found the head of the Women's FA, pitched a story to her, blew up. So that's what we're starting to like build and put all these different data sources together just to make it a bit more interesting. All right, so public data, we just need to make it easier to use. So there was a point in the UK last year where Ryanair, which are a budget airline and some would call a bit of a shower, they cancelled all of their flights, 250,000 flights cancelled. How did they tell their customers? Well, they just put a PDF on their website and says, oh, you deal with it. It's on the PDF, go search for it, we don't care. Which I thought was a really horrible thing to do. So we took the PDF, we created a tool where you could put in your flight number and have an automatic link to get a refund if your flight was on there, which Ryanair should have done in the first place. We then found a bunch of journalists that didn't like Ryanair, spoiler alert, there's loads of them, and then pitched it to them, and what do you know, it goes viral. Slicing it differently, I was talking about the pay gap reports that the government have started to put out. The thing that they do with that as well is they just dump it in a massive database, and I think they do it deliberately to stop people from reporting on it. So if you're looking at a data set you can barely open on your computer, it's going to be very hard for someone to actually make a story about it. So we just turned it into an interactive tool. So we're literally just taking, every time the government publishes something that they perhaps don't want to be seen or they don't want to push out, we'll take it, we'll turn it into something, make it usable for journalists, and then we'll say, hey, we've got this tool. If you're thinking about writing this stuff up. Here's how you can get your raw data. And lastly, public data. So this is a nice, easy one. So we would typically do like site commands for different, so .ac.uk is university websites in the UK. If you do in URL PDF, that will show all of the actual papers they've published, and then a keyword. You'll be very surprised the amount of publicly available documentation and theses and data sets there are from universities that are just not on any other place. So definitely just use advanced operators to find these things. This for me is like the absolute gold. I get loads of good stuff from this. The obvious one is Google Dataset Search. It's really powered by a couple of large database providers. It's okay, and I think it's a good place to kind of start off, but it's not the be all and end all. I recommend things like Kaggle and Statista to get into like real data sets. And if you actually do a little bit of Googling around, there's a ton of API and data providers that are just not mentioned in this dataset search. So I would actually prefer this method of doing it manually than using the data search function in Google. All right, last one is potential data. So this is the survey stuff that I didn't really like. There is one exception, and that's a freedom of information request. Most of the governments around the world will let you ask for information about a public body. The great thing about that is when I'm pitching a journalist a story, I actually just forward them the thing that the government sent me. So I contacted the ambulance service to see how many heart attacks there were at football stadiums up and down the country. The idea being I want to see like who's the most exciting football team as measured by the amount of people having a heart attack in the stadium. It's a bit of a puff piece, but bear with me. So we got it from St. John's Ambulance Service, straight from the government, and then we packaged it up and pitched it to the journalists. And because they could see the thread coming from the government, they're much quicker to publish it because they can see the source of where it's come from. And the last one is Google surveys. Like, yeah, if you're struggling, fine. If you're doing local news or trade, fine, but be warned, they cost a lot and they're all right. If you're really struggling, give it a go, but we do use it sometimes to kind of puff something out. And that's it. So one thing to know is you will never, ever, ever have a viral success with this approach, but you're going to get repeatable and defensible information so that every time you go to this for your business or for your client's business, there's going to be no surprises. You're going to get a regular amount of good, high quality links. You're not going to blow up and go super viral, but you are going to get 30 to 50 good links every time you do this. It's a relatively simple process when you know how. And that's everything from me. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ross. That was super informative, and I think so many things that you said rang true for us as an SEO company. Some of the things that we've tried. I mean, your framework is different to what we've used, and it's great. But certainly around the surveys and how difficult we found to sell those into journos, and actually how we get far better results out of the data sets that are available. One question is from me, and hopefully we'll start getting some questions through from everyone else now, but we've done some freedom of information requests in the past, and they've got us into a little bit of trouble with people. The data's accurate, but obviously we're reporting stuff that government doesn't want us to report. Have you ever had any kind of horror stories along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you the newspaper group that tried to sue us for obvious reasons, but there's a large newspaper group ran by a man that lives in your country who tried to sue us because of some stuff that came out that shouldn't have came out. So yeah, we have. That's the importance of having a brand manager and the actual real PR person in the room. So the way I look at digital PR and actual normal traditional PR is, normal PR is about communicating what's happening in the company to the wider world and controlling the flow of information about the business. Digital PR, we don't really do it. This is more content marketing than digital PR. It just happens that we're pitching journalists. We just care about the links. So there's a big kind of difference there. But yeah, we have gotten hot water about it before. that was the worst case. There's been other cases where we do, a month worth of amazing work, it's all signed off, and then right at the last minute, some guy I've never met in the organization comes in who's way above everyone else and just says hard no to everything, and we need to start again. So yeah, just be cautious and don't do anything too crazy.
Awesome. One other question I've got as well is something that we've been asking in the office this week, which is there is news from Google continuously about clamping down on quality. And one thing that came out this week was around sensationalism. Some of what we do as content providers can fall under the sensationalism kind of category. How are you doing that as an agency?
We're ignoring it, which is perhaps not a very professional thing to say. So that will damage the publications we're pitching. So if they publish something sensationalist with a headline, so Facebook have already done this with Unilad, we've seen it a lot, where they actually killed their organic reach if it was too sensationalist or it didn't match, if it was to fight the original fake news stuff that was coming out. So when it comes to Google, it just means that the publisher's article won't rank as well, or the organic reach will be dampened by Google. The link will still be there though. So although that's perhaps not like a very nice, fluffy, we're all in it together answer, we're paid by our clients to get them links and drive their rankings. We're not paid to make sure that the publisher gets traffic. So we'd already done a bunch of work for them, done all the data stuff, got beautiful visuals, got like all of this stuff, and we're handing the stories to them on a plate. If they choose to go with sensational headlines to drive more clicks, and then one of the platforms dampens their organic reach, it's completely out of our control. If you are a publisher, I would take it very seriously. But we've seen it at Unilad a lot, where they would actually just, instead of getting a couple million people seeing an article, it would be like 10,000.
It's interesting that they just adding my 2 cents. Interesting that they will dampen the whole sensationalism, yet they're pushing more and more for Google Discover. So especially prominent if you have a Google an Android phone, where you get all the news and stuff like that, and you always have those sort of highlights of things that got shared, and funny enough, correlation suggests that sensationalism get picked up more than the average boring title.
That's a great point. And like, who decides what's sensationalist and what's not? Like, who's in charge of that? Like, what I think is sensationalist and what you think are completely different things. God knows what some computer engineer in Silicon Valley thinks sensationalism is. Like, completely different. I think it's probably being measured by lead time of the click. So if you're clicking on it and then short lead time bouncing back, that would maybe be classed as incorrect or sensationalist. Or if there's particularly, their natural language processing is really, really good. So perhaps if they're running that against a set with all their lifetime machine learning stuff, maybe they're using that to dampen it, but I wouldn't be too worried about it until something happens. That's typically always my advice with Google, is like, ignore what they're saying until your data tells you otherwise, because there's a lot of, their PR machine is very, very strong to the SEO community in particular. So it's important you just look at your own analytics.
I have.
So, sorry, Freddie, have you got another question?
Yes. Something that we've tried to do a lot in the past is, in terms of increasing authority and trust, is actually hiring journalists. So especially at the moment, with all the print press going away, there are a lot of journalists that become freelancers, become freelance writers and things like that. What's your experience working with them? I can already see the face.
Yeah, I love it. I love working with them. So we had a Forex company that we're working with for 4 years, and our entire strategy was to get journalists in that space on the payroll and just get them to make stories and pitch them. So they became our. Now, the interesting thing we're getting at the moment with outreach is a lot of people are on furlough, and a lot of people are being made redundant, especially media organizations, because they were already a bad business going down the toilet from a monetization point of view. So, and the quality of work just keeps going down and down and down for mainstream print and also digital publications. So every time I get an out of office response or a furlough response, that goes on to my, we should maybe hire them as a freelancer and get them to do the outreach for us. We find that it's like everything. So I actually recommend when people are dealing with PR companies that they do campaigns, they don't have them for the year, because just take their contacts, take their value they've got in the system, get what you need and go. Because a lot of these guys who've got like relationships, they're not relationships. They know what, 10 guys, 20 guys, let's say 30. What happens when we get all those 30 to publish? Do we do the same 30 again? No, we move on to other people. So I just take all the autoresponders and say I'm on furlough, and that goes into my list of, let me hire you as a freelancer to write some stuff for us. So I'm very into that.
Excellent, thanks, Ross. So from the wider community, have we got any questions for Ross? There was a lot of chatter going on, so I would have thought we would. We'll give
the main question is usually, what is he saying? I can't understand the accent.
You know what, we had this. We had our staff event last night, and we got into a long discussion about the hardest accents in the UK to understand, and Scotland was way up there. It was right at the top, and I have to say, I mean, like you've got a softer accent than most. So my cousins and my family live in Cumbernauld, Glasgow.
Ah.
So yeah, they're pretty hard bunch to understand. So yeah, I think that's being down in London. You're a softie now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my mum went to elocution lessons when she was a kid, because she had like a cleft palate, whatever. But as a side effect of her being taught to just speak words, she came out with this "How now, brown cow," Queen's English accent. That with my dad, who's got just a hardcore Glasgow accent, I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Well, it works. We can all understand you. Good stuff. Well, do you know what? Oh, we have got one question. So the question is government data freely available? And I think that answer is going to vary depending on what country you're in. But if you can give us your view, Ross, that would be great.
Yeah, well, English-speaking markets I've worked in, USA, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, things like that. Yep, it's all freely available. I can't speak to Singapore. I'm not entirely sure, but the vast majority of governments will have some stuff available that you can take for free. If you're doing anything in the UK, there's an entire government agency called the Office for National Statistics that publish all of the statistics to the web. So you can just download these massive data sets completely for free. It's unbelievable that you can get that, but yeah.
Yeah, same here in
most.
I will, but what we will do to answer that question, because I'm not sure about Singapore either, is we will answer that. We'll do a follow-up on that one to the community. So any more questions? Or if I don't see any in the next 10 seconds, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up.
Paul?
Yes?
I have a quick, this is Harshita. I have a quick question. Can I ask?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Ross, for your presentation. It was very honest, I felt, and very candid as well. Thank you so much. I had a question. You gave an example of I think Brisbane example of not using the regular data, but make sure that you pick up the weird data than the regular ones. Can you please give some examples of like what exactly when you meant that weird data than the, for example, if we are defining a persona or something, we try to see the data which are generalized and create a persona kind of thing. But when you say that weird data, I couldn't get it. If you can give some examples, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so outliers, we want to see something that you would that makes your data set look weird. So for example, if I was looking at a person who liked hyper-violent sports like MMA and like BMWs and glamour brands and stuff like that, but also loved teddy bears, which is a completely different So when we're building a picture of this person, he likes to see people fight each other in a cage and garish, you know, diamond encrusted watches, also teddy bears. That doesn't make sense. Why do they like teddy bears? So like diving into that bit that doesn't make sense. The other thing was the casino games example that I gave. These people like computer games, they like football, they like fast food, they also like diamond rings. That's weird. Why do they like diamond rings? Oh, because they're all getting engaged now, because they're that age where they're proposing. So that's their current internet behavior. If I just look at their demographic, I see their age and I see some really basic things that, you know, we all expect. You don't expect them to be looking at the diamond ring. Another one would be if you're into like high fashion and design and stuff like that, but also like camping. I've yet to see like Gucci making a tent, for example. So that's a really weird personality type where I want to see the core thing is, oh, they like high fashion, but also they're really good at making fires. That's weird. Let's dive into that and see what we can get that's an interesting story, because if Facebook reports that, they've got such a large amount of people. It's usually about 300,000 people in an audience that we look at for Facebook. So if it's big enough to pop up in those 300,000 people, it matters. So that's what we always go with. It's not interesting to do something about, you know, people who like fashion. Here's the top 10 shoes this summer. Like, well, everyone does that.
Oh yeah, I feel it's interesting because we usually try to generalize and never think what exactly can add value to it. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So I think that is all of our questions now. So we're just running over a little on time. So just once again, really want to thank you, Ross. That was a great talk. I enjoyed it. I can see from the chatter online that people also really enjoyed it. So well done, really informative. We're getting some thanks through now on chat. In terms of what happens here, everyone, so it's the usual drill. We are going to be doing a blog on this. We will publish the video online and we will circulate that via the meetup group. It normally takes about a week, so please be patient with us. We've got day jobs as well. So thanks again, Ross. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you on SEMrush. Everyone go check it out on SEMrush. Great articles there. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, guys.